Welcome to the Nonprofits, and today we're actually going to talk about a very serious but also very important topic, and that is something very important to me personally, and that is death with dignity. We have a story where a 64-year-old American woman recently made the decision to end her life using a device called the Sarco capsule. This has reignited the conversation about body autonomy as a fundamental human right. This Sarco capsule symbolizes modern autonomy by enabling people to determine how and when they wish to die amidst a terminal illness or even unbearable suffering. By respecting this autonomy, we enhance the quality of life for those facing such circumstances and affirm their dignity in their final moments. As discussions about assisted dying evolve, it's crucial to change cultural perspectives. This incident prompts us to foster open dialogue about the importance of allowing individuals to express control over their own destiny and paving the way for a more compassionate approach to end-of-life care. Now, the story we're talking about here is from CNN.com by Reuters on September 25th, 2024. Now, I have to say that when I initially saw the Sarco capsule with its sleek, futuristic design, it kind of struck me out of almost a sci-fi film. But it also reminded me of like ancient death rituals where, they put you in the ship and send you away, or all this other symbolism. And I thought, that's something that I think could evoke some familiarity and make people perhaps view things a little differently. But knowing that I'm not the only one on the panel, and I'm sure that other people may have an opinion about things. Stephen, I was going to go to you first. Do you think that we stigmatize mental health issues in a way that we don't with other medical problems? When people seek help and it seems to be okay, do we treat mental health issues the same way?
Yes. Big yes, big Y, big E. Yeah. Like when someone has something wrong with their heart, with their liver, with their kidney, they, at least in Canada, we don't hesitate to go see a doctor and find out what is wrong with that organ and do something about it to make it function again. But for some reason, when it comes to the organ that's called the brain, people feel like it is, I don't know if because it isn't about pumping blood. It isn't about filtering blood. It's about the way that you think. And we somehow separate that from the actual process of neurons transmitting across our brain. And we identify with the malady and we say that it is on us. And we are the ones who need to change. We need to change how we think. We need to be doing something better. And we're so afraid to seek a professional's help and try to help our brain operate better. We're just so afraid of looking for that help. And unfortunately, that does lead to the stigma of if there's something wrong with my brain, there's something wrong with me that we don't see when we say there's something wrong with my heart. We don't internalize it, personalize it the same way, unfortunately, with our brain.
I know that in the United States, it wasn't in the United States when it happened, but General MacArthur slapped a guy in World War II who was suffering from what they called then shell shock, which we now call PTSD. And we've come a long ways in many ways from that. But at the same time, we have the he who must not be named of American politics, who, when we had the issue with the people in Cuba having headaches and different problems, and they weren't sure where it was coming from, and it was completely minimized and was like, oh, no, everything's fine, because he can't see it. And I think that that's part of what happens with mental health, is that a lot of it, and of course, we don't see the liver and we can't hold it in our hands and say it's bad, but we can see the impact externally on their body, or the way they act, or how they do things, and go, okay, we see this person has a problem, but there's no little red check engine light on the top of your forehead that lights up to let everybody know there's an issue. And so I think that we tend to minimize that, and that is a very unfortunate thing, something that we see changing, but yes, definitely miles to go. Now, wanted to switch over to you, AJ. And once again, I definitely view and understand it from me. Almost every issue that I talk about when it comes down to individuals comes down to body autonomy, because that is the most important thing. If you can't decide who you are and self-determine you, really what rights do you have? And so with that, do you see this issue with this being a broader issue like abortion rights? Do you think that these play into that same thing as well?
I think that we really should put a lot more thought into what it is that, what problem do we have with somebody having a right to decide what they do with their body. And yeah, we often advocate for body autonomy when we discuss women's rights to abortion and any other type of reproductive care involved in that whole umbrella, right? And, we've argued that forcing a woman to become literally a human incubator against her will is unethical. And I think we can totally make the same statement about end-of-life care, even when the end isn't at the age that we would normally expect it to. Because when we talk about end-of-life care, people think, old age, somebody who's like, 80, 90 or whatever. But sometimes you have somebody that's diagnosed with terminal cancer, I don't know, at 30 or 40, and they are suffering, and they've gone through all the doctors, and they all agree that they're not going to have more than 3 or 6 months. Then yeah, I'll say we need to advocate for people to be able to make the decision of how to end that life without suffering and with dignity.
I think that it's probably one of the most important rights because, I hate to steal a little Shakespeare line, but if we can't decide the most basic of to be or not to be, if we don't have that ability, really, what do we have? What is under our control? Because it is the most basic right that we should have. We don't here in the United States, in many states, but we'll get into that too. And I wanted to switch over to you, Aaron. I know there's a lot of misunderstanding about what exactly we're talking about. Could you explain the distinctions between, the assisted dying, euthanasia, and assisted suicide?
Yeah, so euthanasia and assisted suicide are terms that fall under assisted dying. So euthanasia is when someone else is taking the life of another person with that person's consent. And assisted suicide is when a person is provided the means by which they can end their own life. So euthanasia is something we would do to like a pet. You take your if your pet's terminal and has poor quality of life, you would take your pet to the vet and they would euthanize the animal, and the doctor would perform that procedure on the animal. So those are the differences.
I recently got a cat, and I think some of you may know that, but one of the reasons that I haven't gotten a pet for as long as I did was just the absolute gut-wrenching decision with my previous to let it go. But it was the right choice. And I understand that there's a natural desire to not want to see the person you love or go away. But at the same time, that's a choice that they get to make. And as adults, we need to learn how to understand that and cope with that and support that. Now, going back over to you, Stephen, you and I had talked a little bit about mental health earlier. Do you think that stigma you talked about, do you think that stigma contributes to people feeling isolated or ashamed when they do need help?
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's that's it's a bleeding shame. Like COVID ran amok over everyone in the world, right? And so many of us have weaker mental health outcomes than we did before. There is someone very when we use the word suicide, I'm glad that we were able to break down what the different, definitions of suicide are, because suicide can mean a variety of different things, whether it's euthanizing, whether it's assisted suicide. But it also encapsulates that desperate form of suicide as well for the person who feels trapped, who feels like they can't continue on and they are desperate to free of that. And suicide can also be speaking to that as well. And someone very close to me recently went through a couple of those different phases where they were desperate to be free from the situation that they were in, and they did violence on their body, and they regretted it. They called 911, and they were then transported to hospital, and they spent 4 months in hospital trying to get better, wanting to get better, working so hard to get better just so that they could get out of our hospitals. And in the end, they realized that after 4 months, like, oh, you aren't actually actually getting better. It's just that this oxygen is actually sustaining you. And every time we take you off the oxygen, that's when you actually deteriorate. And that's when they said, oh, okay, well then, now that we know that, no more oxygen. I'm done. I'm out. I'm gone. And it just blows my mind that we would want to eliminate, reduce access to people having that kind of autonomy over their own life. Yes, it's hard. It's horrible for folks who have to be put into that situation, that is their quality of life. And at the same time, for the people who are just feeling desperate and just are looking for a way out of their current situation, they need just as much help as the person who has made this well deliberated thought, right? And that's the biggest takeaway that's really impacted me this summer, is just not wanting anyone to feel alone as my friend did in that moment, and just pleading with people if they're in a difficult spot like that to please build into your communities, reach out to people. You don't have to be alone, and just find the way to find those systems, because no one should ever have to feel that desperate.
Yes, and that's one of the things, and I'm glad you brought that up, because when we're talking about a topic like this, and you mentioned suicide being such a broad topic, and that's so very true, because while we want people who have come to that determination and realize that they are not equipped to deal with pain or whatever is their reality, we want them to have that right. But it is also just as important to remind us that people who are in pain, who don't want necessarily to make that choice, whether they do or don't, they need to be able to find that support. They need to be able to have that support structure. And this goes all about destigmatizing it to where people can speak honestly about it. Because right now, if you tell oftentimes, especially in the United States, if you tell someone, okay, I made the determination to do this, their first reaction is, oh, no, you do, no, you want to do this. You don't want to do that. And those type of things, while for the right situations, you want to be supportive, but at the same time, support isn't telling somebody else what they can and can't do. And that's something I think that, 3 years ago, I was given a 50-50 chance on making it 2 years. So I did a lot. This became a very real subject for me. It had always been one I'd had an important viewpoint on, but this definitely leveled up, for the lack of a better way to put it. And with that in mind, it's something that it's good to have people who are supportive of your decision, whichever one it is, because nobody on either side of those spectrums should feel alone, because that's a failing of everybody around them when that happens, because nobody should be alone. Now, I was going to switch over to you, AJ. Why do you believe that assisted suicide here in the United States is only legal in specific U.S. states, particularly blue states? Do you find that telling?
It isn't taken lightly in the United States, assisted death. And it's only legal in 9 states, including California, Oregon, Colorado. Colorado, I would say, is the one that most people hear about. Washington, Vermont, and I don't know if you noticed, but these are all blue states. I think that should be very telling. So all of these states have something called death with dignity laws, and the laws around the procedure are really strict. But this is also the case in Switzerland, where the case of this woman happened. My parents live there, and we've discussed this before. And in order to qualify for assisted death, you have to have psychiatric evaluations to determine that you're mentally sound, that you're capable of making and communicating your own healthcare decisions. You need to have been diagnosed with a terminal illness that will end your life. It's usually around 6 months or so. And it also has to be corroborated by more than one medical professional, not just one telling you, hey, you're going to die, that's it. No, you have to go through a whole set of process, because, sometimes misdiagnosis can happen. And another key and probably the most important and requirement that you're going to need for this to be approved for this is that you have to be capable of self-administering and ingesting your medication without the assistance of somebody else, because the facility or anyone, the doctors, they cannot do it for you. This will be murder. But these rules are what show the difference between ending your life during a mental health crisis due to severe depression or something, some mental type of issue, versus making that decision with a more clear head, with more time and a lot of effort being put into it. You have medical professionals assisting you in making that decision. You putting it in place in a safe way that lets you end your life at your own terms, in a peaceful and dignified way.
I do find it very important. And this is one of the things that really puzzles me, is that when we talk about the people who consistently are opposed to death with dignity, you find time and again that these same people are the ones that we find dismissing mental health issues, that we find not wanting to put the money into the system to help people in these. And it's like, if you want good mental health and you think that this is a mental health issue in some of these cases, and which most of these, it's not a mental health issue, because as you said, there's a process you have to go through to get there. But they don't want to they just want to say, okay, it's a mental health issue, but we don't want to do anything about it. We want to then say, okay, we solved it, we figured out what's causing it, so let's pretend it didn't happen. Now, Aaron, I was wanting to reach out to you because we talked about people who are opposed to it, who want to make sure you don't have that right. Why do you think that society, or particularly here in the United States, why do you think we often prevent humans from dying on their own terms, even when they're suffering, and oftentimes suffering horribly? What do you think that is that compels many people to say, no, that shouldn't be an option?
Honestly, I really don't know. I don't understand. I imagine if I was to guess, it would probably be religiously based, even though I can't really recall a scripture in the Bible that says it's wrong to want to end your life. There's just this culture of you should be alive at no matter the cost, right? You need to cling on to life no matter the cost. There's that culture in Christianity, especially, that prevents people from having these discussions, at least. And we've talked a little bit about this is a bodily autonomy issue. I actually see it differently. I think this is a life autonomy issue. This is people not being able to do with their life what they want to do with it. And if someone wants to end their life, I don't think it should matter if they have it. I don't think there should be any requirements. As long as you're mentally competent, you should be able to do with your life what you want. AJ mentioned that in some states, the law is you have to have a terminal illness. I don't necessarily agree that you should have to have a terminal illness. If you want to end your life, then you should be able to do that with dignity. And I think the Hippocratic Oath gets in the way, the first do no harm. I think unilaterally that's decided that death is the ultimate harm. And so doctors can't help and assist someone in dying. And I think that needs to be reevaluated. I think there are worse things than death. Living in a mentally, people with dementia and Alzheimer's that live in a different mental altered state. I think that's, personally for me, I find that to be a worse state than death. I would rather be not around anymore than suffering cognitive decline where I don't recognize people. My relationships are gone because I don't remember people. I don't remember things. That's worse than death to me. And to speak a little bit about the culture around suicide, there are lots of violent suicides that people, in desperate straits have to resort to. What would that look like if instead of people not thinking they didn't have any other recourse, they knew, oh, I can end my life. I live in a culture where I can end my life whenever I want to. And there are ways in which I can do that safely and securely, not have to worry about, surviving some horrible violence. Wouldn't that help and increase the chances of people seeking help? Right? If they knew that, hey, I want to end my life, and there are processes I can go through, let me go and start that process. That's going to I would think that's going to increase the chances of people go out and get help and talk to somebody about their mental health issues. And so if they're in crisis, they actually get help and they come out of it realizing, oh, I didn't really want to end my life. I was just in a mental health crisis. So I really, really think the culture around suicide, assisted suicide, ending people's lives really needs to change. And we need to look at it as a life autonomy issue, that people should be able to do with their life what they want. Even if I disagree with somebody else's choice, it's still their choice to make.
I think you made, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just like the cynical part of me says that like one reason why it would be, illegal is because dead people don't pay taxes. So it'd be harder on the bottom line if people are suddenly killing themselves. Oh, well, then we can't, that cuts down a revenue source. But also by the flip side, like the people who are struggling with health outcomes and, the resources that get sunk into that, it seems to me me that like when your president was around during the pandemic, he who shall not be named, when he was downplaying the pandemic, I said, oh no, this makes sense, because if it's just the old people who are being affected, then that's fewer people who are on Medicaid, who are contributing less to the economic bottom line. They're the ones who are going to be impacted the most, and so his economic outlooks would look rosy if suddenly there were fewer people using resources than they're giving to. But I also think that there's hesitancy around adopting a more liberal attitude in this way, just because it's one of those doors that you can't really close once you've opened it. Just like someone, going through that doorway, metaphorically speaking, there's not going to be any chance of saying, you know what, I changed my mind, I actually want to live. You can't, once you've opened up that floodgate of saying, yeah, we have less emphasis on living than we used to, it's going to be hard to walk that back. So it's okay if we take a slow, steady pace down that hill. In my books, I don't think we need to be running, because once we pass certain markers, there's no going back. And I think it's okay to be slow and deliberate if it means a better future for everyone.
I think that, well, I want to touch on a couple things. First, what you said, Aaron, I think that I'm going to tell you a little secret that you may not know, but there's a very large percentage of modern day Christianity that has absolutely no basis whatsoever in the Bible.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I knew you knew that. But, because one of the problems and one of the reasons that suicide became the stigma that it has for the Christians is that there were actually early cults in the early 1st and 2nd century that went out there trying to fight and stab people, wanting to get killed, because if they got killed, then they were martyred for Christ. So when you go back and read, it's really interesting. It was a whole realm of, they didn't want people committing suicide, and so they were kind of doing suicide by their version of cop. But I think both of you hit though. You mentioned Stephen, you mentioned taxes and the loss of taxes. I think for the church, it's a loss of tithes and a loss of offerings too. So they want to keep those butts in the seat, because that's how they get their money. Now, I wanted to ask you, AJ, are there anything you wanted to touch on before we wrap this up?
I think I'd like to say that we all wish that we could have our loved ones around, until the end of our lives. But that is a selfish reason to require them to continue to suffer against their will if what they want to do is no longer be around. So, I think in Switzerland specifically, the fact that it is legal and that anyone can travel there makes it a magnet for people to want to go there and end their life over there with assisted suicide. Their laws are lax but strict at the same time. Like I said, anyone can come in, but they do have like a thorough process. And I think that that's very important. What Stephen said, we shouldn't just do it, like, oh yeah, let everybody choose whenever they want to die or make suicide, whatever, to make suicide great again or anything like that. Nobody's advocating for that, right? Like we're advocating for a process to be put through where it is not seen as taboo anymore, and where the person can take their own body autonomy back again and choose how to end their life.
I think you're right.
Manner.
Yes. And Aaron, I think something you said I believe it was you that said it, that is very important, is that number one, yes, you should have the right to make that self-determination regardless of your situation. And at the same time, by having a process, by having it where you're going to meet with medical professionals and you're going to talk to people and deal with this, it also opens up an opportunity for people who need that help and may change their mind in that process. And if we get somebody who goes, oh, I don't want to die, great. It's not like, no, you signed the paper last week, so you're in now. It's not that kind of situation. Yeah. And then if we get somebody who needed help, who got help through that process and didn't die through that process, that's a win too, because really it's about well-being. It's about what's best for people. And so with that in mind, it only makes sense. But, since when have we expected people to make sense? And maybe that's part of the problem. And, one of you, I believe it was you, Stephen, mentioned he who must not be named. And what was so odd about that, though, is that the bulk of his voters are old. old. So it's like, that's probably not a good political strategy. But speaking of strategy, if you want to see some good strategic stories that don't pertain to such serious topics, click below.